Hello everybody, and welcome to the Core Set 2021's Yoshi 1 Kenobi Mythic Rare Tier List. So in this video I'm going to go through all the Mythic Rares that are spoiled for the Core Set 2021 and give them a rank from D to SS and order them within that rank as to what I think is going to be the impact on standard of these cards. So first let's describe the different ratings that I'll use. The SS rating, which I'll not be using, is for meta warping, likely to require a ban. I'm talking cards of the power level of Oko, Thief of Crown, Fires of Invention, this level of cards. In terms of the S level, there are cards that are extremely powerful and they're the key players in the metagame, and most decks that can play them are actually going to play them. For example, Teferi Time Raveler, everyone's favorite card, Euro, Croxa. These are all cards that are key players and they keep on coming over and over again. You see people going towards the colors explicitly to play these cards. Then there's the A rank, which is for solid cards that are the best at their specific roles. They might not be as shiny, but cards like Fervent Champion, it's best at attacking early. You wouldn't think of not including Fervent Champion in your super aggressive deck that plays red. Heartless Act, one of the most efficient removal spell that we have in black. These are cards that I'd give an A rating to. Then there's the B rating, which is it's good enough to make the cut in some decks. I mean, we have to play 60 or 80 cards. You know, Yorian's still a thing. So for example, cards like Cavalier of Flames, Alseid of Life's Bounty. They're cards that you play because they fit your strategy and you're limited to the standard pool set of cards. Then we go to C, the fringe playables. Cards that are too slow or too weak for top tier decks, but that people still like to play. I mean, I like to experiment with a bunch of new cards that are fringe playables. That's why I have these challenge videos that I encourage you to look at. So for example, there's cards like Death's Oasis, Lutri the Spell Chaser, the Ultimatums. They're all cards that can be played, but they're not optimized for good decks. And then there's the D rating, which is unlikely to see play outside of limited. And that I think about most commons, or you know, like a 1/4 vigilance for 2 with no other effect, not likely to see play. And these are the ratings that I'm going to go with, and I'm going to build that tier list. So first, let's begin with the lowest rank. All the mythic rares that are of rank D, and there are none. Actually, the first card that I'll review, which I think is the worst card, the worst mythic rare in the set, is Massacre Worm, to which I give a rating of C. So when Massacre Worm enters the battlefield, creatures your opponent control get -2/-2 until end of turn, and whenever a creature an opponent control dies, that player loses 2 life. Well, everyone likes Massacre Girl, and this is a Massacre Worm. For 1 extra mana, you'd expect it to be stronger. Well, Massacre Girl has this ability of wiping a board from small creatures up to huge creatures and still living through it, which is very powerful. If you look at Massacre Worm, that -2/-2 isn't going to be able to reach any 3 toughness creatures, obviously, by definition. Now, doing -2/-2 to my opponent's board is something that I'd expect at 3 mana. We have Cry of the Carnarium, we used to have Drowned in Sorrow, so if I want to use this as a defensive effect against hard aggro decks, then I'll want to play these cheaper cards. I don't want to play this on 6 mana, I'll be dead by 6 mana. The second part of the effect, whenever a creature an opponent control dies, that player loses 2 life. That part of the effect I might be underrating right now. I don't think that it's going to be quite relevant. I mean, we're talking about a 6 mana card. At 6 mana, I want to hit for 5, 10, do ridiculous things. Not kill a creature and drain my opponent for 2. 6/5s are decent stats, but I'd expect more out of a 6-drop. And on 6, it's too weak to play on 6, and it's not powerful enough to be worth cheating out. It might be worth a 1-of in one of these reanimator type strategies as a toolbox option. That's where I see its role. But overall, I don't really like this card. The second weakest card, according to my standards, are Mangara, the Diplomat. So it's a lifelink 2/4 for 4. Whenever an opponent attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of those creatures are attacking you and or a planeswalker you control, draw a card. And whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, draw a card. The first time I looked at this card, I thought, wow, this is really good. This is amazing. I mean, against all these aggro decks, they're going to attack me. I'm going to block. I'm going to gain life. I'm going to draw cards. My opponent's going to be struggling. And then I started thinking more about it. Alright, well, if my opponent is attacking into Mangara with multiple creatures, then that means that he's probably able to kill that creature. He can kill Mangara with something like an Embercleave. And that way the lifelink's not going to be relevant. I'll lose my 4-drop. Drawing a card is not really an effect that you want when you're about to die. It's really more of a tempo game against these aggressive opponents. And against control opponents, well, their first spell is going to be killing this. So removal, for example, we have Heartless Act is going to kill this with a huge benefit. Teferi is going to bounce this and laugh in your face. Embercleave deals with this extremely easily. So I don't see it as a very good card to block against the aggressive strategies. Even like the white Boggles type deck is going to ignore this. It's just going to attack with one creature and say, you have a 2/4 on the ground. I don't care. Now against these control strategies, well, you're playing a 2/4 lifelink on turn 4. Control is going to let you resolve this, walk away, and do some more crazy stuff. It's a reactive card that doesn't really fit into a game plan. When you play this on turn 4, you're playing it as a blocker, as a wall that's trying to gain you incremental advantage, but it's not furthering your strategy. You can't pressure your opponent by attacking with 2/2 with your 4-drop. It's just not going to win the game for you. So overall, I don't think it does as much as its text looks like it's going to give it. The text looks great, but I think in practice it's just not going to perform the way it looks like it's going to do. Which is why I'm giving it a rating of C. Next on the list is the Chromatic Orrery. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color. You can tap the artifact for 5 mana, essentially of any color. And you can pay 5 mana to draw a card for each color among permanents you control. Now this is an extremely fun card. It's a type of card that's essentially built for fun formats like Commander or casual formats. In terms of standard, when you hit 7 mana, there are more powerful options to play. Now I will say this with a caveat, because when you cast it for 7, you do gain back 5 mana of any color. So it's not like you're investing all your mana directly into this. But if you've reached 7 mana, you're unlikely to have many cards left to play. And you typically want to have your big mana permanent count when you play it. Because if you start playing Chromatic Orreries and a bunch of other high mana cards, then you're likely to be stuck with a bunch of expensive cards in hand, which is going to make it very awkward. So you'd rather have the card that counts instead of the Chromatic Orrery, which will power up the card that counts later. So because of that cost, I think it's not going to be a competitive card. But if you want a really cool application, it's awesome to play with the Finale cards. In particular, if you reach 7 for the Orrery, and the extra 5 mana is going to bring you to 12, which is enough to activate the ultimate on most of the Finale cards. I think there's some potential there. It's definitely something I'm looking forward to playing with. Grim Tutor, a reprint that a lot of Commander players are happy to see. Search your library for a card, put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library, and you lose 3 life. It's the pay 3 life, 3 mana to fetch the card you want. Extremely good in combo decks. But paying 3 mana and 3 life and essentially wasting a turn early game is an extremely high cost. That is not worth it in most metagames. If you want to fetch a card, then Fae of Wishes is the tried and true option. That's much better in a competitive environment. In particular, against aggro decks, you get to play it as a 1/4 blocker. Against more slower decks, you get to activate the ability. You can even double it with the Lucky Clover, where it really shines. Grim Tutor might have seen a bit more play if Fires of Invention didn't hit the ban list. Because that with Fire, you get to Grim Tutor any card you like and cast it for free. So it does give you a lot of flexibility, but I don't think it's going to see much play. There might be some kind of combo deck that'll come out and want a couple of Grim Tutors, but outside of that, I think it's going to be more a card for the binder. So with that, we've completed the C tier of my tier list. So let's move on to the cards that are going to have a B rating. The first card in our B rank is Liliana, Waker of the Dead. So what this Planeswalker does is very similar to the very famous Liliana of the Veil, which is a 3-mana Planeswalker that's used in Modern for quite some time. Her +1 ability is a symmetrical both player discard a card, while the third ability is some kind of removal effect. In this case, its target creature gets -X until end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your graveyard. Right? Typically by turn 4, you're going to have 2 to 4 cards in your graveyard, which should be enough to remove most 3-drops in the game. And as it's going to scale, it's not quite a perfect remove target creature, but it's fairly close. And her ultimate, at the beginning of combat, you revive a creature from either graveyard and give it haste, which is a really fun ultimate, which will win you the game, hopefully. On the other hand, even though there's a lot of similarities with Liliana of the Veil, I think the most important part is the converted mana cost, which is 4. And if we want to compare that, Liliana of the Dark Realms in M13 had the same minus ability, the same converted mana cost, and a good +1, which might even have been better than this one, was search for Swamp in your deck. So I don't expect this version of Liliana to see much play because of that expensive mana cost. The removal effect's not that great, and really the +1's okay. I mean, the advantage is that you can use the +1 in most matchups, and it's going to be favorable. You can use it in control matchups. -3 is better against aggro, so she is fairly flexible. But because of similarities to a card that didn't see much play, I don't think it's going to be played very much. Next up is Teferi, Master of Time. Now, since it's a Teferi card, I should probably rank it blindly in the S category based on our experiences with the previous versions of Standard. Also, the artwork is really amazing. I love the artwork on that card. But let's actually take a look at the effect. So it's a 4-mana Planeswalker, which is pretty good, with one of the most awesome passive abilities ever. You may activate loyalty abilities of Teferi, Master of Time on any player's turn. Anytime you could cast an instant. That means +1 on my turn, +1 on your turn, +1 on my turn, -3 on your turn. Very flexible, lots of loyalty. It essentially starts at 5 loyalty. Now, a high loyalty Planeswalker with that ability has already seen play. Well, is already in Standard. We have the Royal Silence. For 3 mana, we have high loyalty and the same +1 ability. Now, Royal Silence kind of saw a little play in Standard, but not very much. So that +1 is not going to sell this Planeswalker to me. The -3, target creature you don't control phases out. Now, so you're basically taking a creature opponent control and kind of tapping it. You're removing it from play for a turn. And it's going to start existing again at the beginning of your opponent's turn. Now, phasing doesn't trigger enter the battlefield. effects, so you don't have to be afraid of your opponent's creature just coming back and re-triggering that effect, which is pretty good, but it's going to come back without Summoning Sickness because it was already in play. It really just ceased to exist temporarily. And for a 4-mana Planeswalker, I'd really expect harder removal than this. Now, some of the counterplay to Embercleave, for example, there is some value there. And because that passive ability is just so awesome, I kind of want to rate this Planeswalker higher, but honestly it really just has 2 weak abilities. And the ultimate, take 2 extra turns after this one, should be good enough to win you the game, of course. And this Planeswalker giving you a +2 every turn, you'll reach that ultimate fairly quickly. So overall, I think it's going to see some play. Probably to spam that draw discard engine, some kind of Phoenix build, but I don't think it's going to be a main player in the metagame, which is why I'm giving it the rank of B. Next is Rin and Seri, Inseparable. That's the buy a box promo, so although you can't technically get that card as part of a pack, it is still a mythic rare in the core set 2021. So let's see, 4 mana, 3 different colors in the Naya color set. When you cast a dog, you create a cat. When you cast a cat, you create a dog. And it's a dog-cat legendary creature. So that's a fairly good passive ability. Stats line 4/4/4/4, pretty solid, even for something in green. Actually, it's good stats for this converted mana cost in these colors. And an ability where you pay 3 mana with hard colors, and you deal damage to target equals number of dogs you control, and you gain life equal to the number of cats you control, which will almost always be the same number for both abilities, because when you cast a dog, you'll have a dog on the battlefield plus the cat token. When you cast a cat, you'll have the cat plus the dog token. So you increase the number of cats and dogs fairly quickly, so that ability becomes good fairly fast. Now you need to tap Rin and Seri when you activate this ability, but it's still a fairly good ability. So good stats, good abilities, nothing groundbreaking here. The main downside is that it's really only good in the cat-dog tribal deck, and it doesn't impact the board the turn you play it, so it's really going to come down to how good the cats and dogs archetype is going to be. If it's good, I can see this being played in a couple of copies, and the passive ability of the card is going to be very good. Otherwise, well, someone's going to play cats and dogs. I mean, it's a cool archetype, and it's going to be played in that deck, hopefully. Which is why I'm giving it a rating of B. Next we have Ugin, the Spirit Dragon. Mighty dragon that faced Nicol Bolas, his brother in the fate of the universe, multiverse, Ravnica. Kind of all the same thing. Anyways, we have this powerful Planeswalker, which we've seen before. It's +2. It gives him the ability to lightning bolt anything. Very powerful. And is -X, exile all permanents with converted mana cost X or less. That's 1 or more color, which is basically a free board wipe. So you board wipe and then you lightning bolt by gaining loyalty. Its ultimate, you gain 7 lives, draw 7 cards, put up to 7 permanent cards from your hand on the battlefield. Could also be known as win the game, which you'd expect from an 8-mana Planeswalker. So solid removal, tons of loyalty, you get him on the ground, and you're in a solid spot. Now, I'm rating this as B. It's seen plays in past standards as a win condition of control decks, but with the power creep that's been going on, there are more powerful things to do for 8 mana. I mean, you have a Dream Trawler that comes in at 6 and will close games really quickly. You expect your board wipes closer to 4 or maybe even 5 mana to get some benefits. So I don't really see Ugin as the traditional way to close games. I don't think it's going to be that popular. It's a powerful card, but there isn't really a way to cheat it out that I can think of. If that becomes available, then this card is going to be awesome and ranked up very quickly. But as I see things, even with all the ramp we have with Simic colors, I think this is only going to see play in some decks here and there as the chosen win condition, which is probably going to be subpar. Next we have Garruk Unleashed, a 4-mana planeswalker in green, whose +1 allows you to give a creature +3/+3 and trample. Yuck. That's not appealing. This -2 summons the traditional 3/3 green beast token, and if your opponent controls more creature than you put the loyalty counter on Garruk. But if your opponent has more creatures than you, then that means they can get through to Garruk and likely kill him, so that +1 loyalty isn't likely to help very much. And the ultimate, at the beginning of your end step, you put a creature card from your library on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. It's a little sad when your Planeswalker ultimate is actually the bread and butter ability of another Planeswalker, namely Luca. So Garruk's ultimate is actually Luca's ability that he can use twice. It's disappointing, I must say. Now this Planeswalker is in a bit of a weird spot, because we have Vivien Arkbow Ranger at 4 mana, and Vivien Monster's Advocate at 5 mana. And both of these do some things much better than Garruk. So the Arkbow Ranger puts 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature and gives it trample as a plus, which feels superior to the plain +3/+3 and trample in most situations. Her minus ability allows you to fight 2 creatures, and her ultimate, which you can activate on the second turn, fetches a creature from the sideboard. So strictly on 4 mana, I feel that Vivien Arkbow Ranger is the stronger Planeswalker. The only disadvantage is she doesn't get to actually defend herself on an empty board. As Vivien Monster's Advocate has a much stronger minus ability, and actually the summoning of the 3/3 is her plus ability, which brings her to higher loyalty. So if you want a spam token, Vivien Monster's Advocate's there. If you want a 4 mana Planeswalker, the Arkbow Ranger's there. So I think Garruk Unleashed is going to be hard pressed to find its place in the metagame. On the flip side, summoning 3/3 beasts has been good in the past, and the fact that Garruk Unleashed is on 4 mana and does affect the board immediately probably has some place. It just has very little wiggle room to find that optimal place of play. Basri Ket. We have the new face on the block, the Sand Planeswalker, using the Arrow of Oketra to impose pain on his opponent. Well, let's look at the +1 ability. Put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 creature. You can put it on your opponent's creature. I guess that's a plus side, very little. It gains indestructible until end of turn. So you put a +1/+1 counter and indestructible to a creature. It's like the 3 mana Ajani of old, plus indestructible, which is a nice upside. -2 ability. Whenever 1 or more non-token creature attack, create that many 1/1 white soldier tokens, tapped and attacking. Now this is where this Planeswalker gets most of its power from. You summon a spam of tokens, and this ultimate, at the beginning of combat, you create a 1/1, put a +1/+1 on each creature you control, so essentially build an army of token incrementally, which is pretty good. So, upsides and downsides. It has no impact on an empty board. So you play this, you don't have a creature, you +1 to do nothing, which is not where you want to be. Now, this Planeswalker really needs a horde of creatures. So let's say you play a 1-drop on 1, a 2-drop on 2, and Basri on 3. Then its -2 ability is going to summon 2 1/1 tokens attacking, tapped and attacking. So your big minus ability is going to have a similar impact to Legion Warboss. And that's kind of best case scenario. So Legion Warboss is good. So that would be fairly good ability, and then if your creatures die, you still have your Planeswalker living. And best case scenario, you play a 1-drop, and then 2 1-drops, and then you use Basri's -2 playing him on turn 3 to summon 3 tokens tapped and attacking, having the Planeswalker on the side. And that's really where I think his niche is going to be, in a deck full of 1-drops. Essentially a White Weenies deck or a very low-costed Warriors or Knights deck. And that's where he's going to shine. And he's going to have a very small window of opportunity where he gets played. And the -2 ability is going to make it worth it to flood the board with 1/1s. And still keep the Planeswalker in case of board wipe. Note that on the next turn you have to plus him again. I think it's going to be a hard sell. Even right now, Legion Warboss is mostly pushed out of the meta, unless you're summoning Agents of Treachery with Winota, which is no longer legal. So overall, I think Basri has a very little window where he's slightly more efficient than other cards, but because he has no impact on an empty board, I think similar cards like Legion Warboss or even the Gideon would have a bit more value on 3. Fiery Emancipation. 6 mana enchantment. If a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage to that permanent or player instead. Did I read this right? Triple. 3 times. Tons. It blows up your opponent. So when you want to play this card, you want to have a board with lots of stuff. Then you hit turn 6 and boom! Fiery Emancipation. And your striking force that was going to attack for 10 is now attacking for 30. And then you win the game on the spot. That's kind of the best case scenario. Another good case scenario, you slam this on the board, and the next turn, boom, 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 you send a bunch of burn spells to your opponent's face and just wipe him out. Well, really, this is a win more type of card. You need to be in a position where your board is fairly strong. And then you can attack, and all of that damage goes in, and the triplicating effect deals a lot of damage. Now, if you don't have that, then it's a 6 mana I pass the turn type of effect, which can be very costly. You don't really want to pass the turn on turn 6. Also, in most red decks, it's going to be a dead card in your hand for quite some time, while very aggressive red decks don't want to play this because they need to spend every single resource to take down their opponent's lives. So this is more in a mid-range type of deck, or something that ramps. I can see some use there, but let's see the comparables. So the other cards that increase damage are Torbrand and Obosh, and to some extent Embercleave. Embercleave essentially does a bit more than double the damage of one creature. So Torbrand and Obosh have the same upside and the same weakness. They have bodies, which means that on an empty board, if I drop a Torbrand, I have pressure. I have this 2/4 sturdy creature that threatens to hit for 4 and boost anything else I have in my hand. If I play Fiery Emancipation, I'm a sitting duck. I'm an open target, and I don't have anything else to pressure. The same thing with Obosh, a 3/5 that threatens to hit for 6 is a lot more intimidating than Fiery Emancipation. On the flip side, it means that if my creature, it's much easier to remove the creatures than an enchantment. So Fiery Emancipation is probably going to be used in some kind of combo decks where you play it and then you burn your opponent, or as a finisher in some kind of Gruul build. But then again, Embercleave you can cast for much cheaper, and it's going to have an impact very similar, if not better, when you're playing bigger creatures. So you don't want to play this with small creatures. You don't really want to play this with big creatures. You kind of want to play it with spells. But then you're competing with 1000-Year Storm, which is a bit more versatile than Fiery Emancipation, which makes it very hard for this card to find a niche where you want to play it. I really think the way you want to play it is you stack 4 of them and shock your opponent for 162. Next on our list, we have Elder Gargaroth, the small red bird looking at the destruction of the forest by a 2-tusked monster. Now, what does this little red bird have? Has vigilance, reach, trample. Wait, it doesn't have flying. Oh, then we must be talking about the huge dinosaur. Okay, so we are talking about this huge dinosaur. So 6/6 for 5, Vigilance, Trample, Reach. Not the best keywords on a creature. Reach is probably the weakest keyword that a creature can have. Although Reach and Vigilance go fairly well together, so that you can attack without any fear of surprise attack by a dragon or something like that. Trample is fairly good in land where we're playing with cat oven combo. You get to pierce through those cats. So that's decent. And now for the oomph. Whenever it attacks or blocks, you choose to either create a 3/3, gain 3 life, or draw a card. These are fairly good effects. Of course, the gain 3 life is a little weak, but sometimes you need that life. And so it's going to be a fair blocker against those red deck wins matchup. And it's probably going to be one of green's answer to it. The main problem I have with this card is it does nothing when it enters the battlefield, which means it's going to get eclipsed by Uro. So Uro does very similar things. It's a 6/6, which you can cast for 4 with a slightly more restricted mana cost. And when you cast it, you gain 3 life and draw a card. Plus there's the bonus of ramping. Plus you get to cast it for 3 for benefits. And when it attacks, it gains these benefits as well. The benefits of Uro are much better than the Vigilance, Reach, Trample that we get from Elder Gargaroth. And so this card's probably not going to see play in decks that play green and blue, which means that this is probably going to be a card that's going to be played in Green Stompy, for example. Might see some place in Gruul, but then again, you really need to attack with this card or block with it to get the value that you paid for. The 6/6 for 5 is likely just going to get Teferied or killed by a kill spell, Murderous Rider or something like that. And you're down on mana after that exchange. You haven't gained anything. Next on our list is Discontinuity, which I give a B rating. But this is probably the card I've had the most trouble ranking because of its really different effect. Let's read it. So as long as it's your turn, this card costs 2. And the main effect is end the turn. Now, let's look at the best use cases and worst cases for this card. So as a best case, you activate it during your opponent's upkeep, and you basically end the turn before they get to draw a card or activate anything, which means that it's 6 mana, take an extra turn. That's about as good as it can be. Plus, you have the added flexibility of if it's your turn, your opponent casts something that you don't like a kill spell on a key creature, you can end the turn, negate that effect, and it acts as a 2 mana counter spell during your turn. You can keep it and use it as a counter spell during your opponent's turn that'll also end the combat step and be very powerful there as well. But let's look at it from the downside. This is not a Nexus of Fate. First of all, once it's cast, it gets exiled. It doesn't go back into your deck, which of course made Nexus of Fate overpowered. That's a different topic. And it's not just a free extra turn. The main reason is that if you want to have the extra turn kind of ability, you need to activate it during your opponent's turn to end your opponent's turn. To do that, you must let your opponent untap. There is no timing window where you can cast this before your opponent untaps, which means that your opponent has mana to play with. And we've seen that with Temur Reclamation right now, where even though you can't play creatures and you can't play sorcery, having mana open to cast instant is sometimes almost as good as a turn. So against decks that can play instants, whether it's draw spell, counter spells, or anything of the sort, you're letting them untap and get access to that turn-wide resource of mana. So against these types of deck, Discontinuity is going to be fairly weak. Against a pure creature deck, this is essentially an extra turn with benefits. So it goes from a super powerful card to something much weaker. So we might see it as one or two of in the main deck that get boarded out against bad matchups. It's going to depend on the metagame and which decks can actually play it. Another reason why I give it such a good rating is because it slots well in Bant control and Temur Reclamation right now. In particular, we've seen how Nexus of Fate performs in Temur Reclamation. This costs one less mana, so in the good matchups, Temur Reclamation could slot it in and take a couple of extra turns and just win the game off of that. And overall, I think with all the counter magic and the mythical disputes that are out there, this can turn into a huge blowout. And I don't think it's going to be super powerful. It's going to depend on the metagame, and I suspect that it's going to be used but not mainstream. This concludes our B ranked cards. So we have them from top to bottom, and we're about to enter our A rank. The first card in our A rating is Chandra, Heart of Fire. Now this is the only core set Planeswalker that I'm putting in the A rank. So let's start by evaluating its abilities. First off, it starts with 5 loyalties for 5 mana, which is fairly solid, and both core abilities are +1s, which means that you're going to take up to 6, which will make it fairly hard for Chandra to get killed on an attack unless you're in a very bad spot. So you have the ability to deal 2 damage to anything, which is a fair baseline ability. And the ability where I think Chandra is really going to shine. Discard your hand, then exile the top 3 cards of your library. Until the end of turn, you may play the cards exiled this way. And her ultimate, search for red instants and sorcery, add 6 mana, you may cast those. It's a moderately weak ultimate, but it's still an ultimate. The reason why you play this Chandra is for the first ability. The ability to look at the top 3 cards of your deck, exile them, and be able to cast these cards is similar to effects that have been hugely successful in Standard. Stuff like Experimental Frenzy, Escape of the Wilds. It's not as powerful as these effects, but you get to do it every turn. So I think that the huge card advantage that Chandra is going to provide is going to make her a kill or lose the game type of target. And because it's going to have that big an impact when you get to resolve her and get her to stick on the battlefield, I believe she's going to be one of the main engines in red decks going forward. Next, we have Baneslayer Angel. Now this card has seen print under different names time and time again. We've seen Lyra Dawnbringer in one of the last core sets. We've seen Baneslayer Angel in its original form earlier as well, and we're seeing its reprint right now. So it's a 5/5 flying first strike lifelink with protection from demons and dragons. Now the protection from demons and dragons is fringe. It's not really relevant to its abilities. It'll come up sometimes, but it's not why you play it. You play it because it bricks wall red deck wins and hard aggro strategies. In particular, the combination of first strike and high power and lifelink is actually very good against Embercleave. One of the main problems of having big creatures against red deck wins right now is the fact that red deck can go over the top and kill your creature with an Embercleave, or go over the top and kill you with an Embercleave. But the fact that Baneslayer Angel is going to strike at the same time as Embercleave's first strike, and still be big enough to essentially, at the very least, trade with the first strike of anything, including Torbrand, means that your opponent's not going to blow you out with Embercleave, so you can safely block with Baneslayer Angel. And if your opponent doesn't have these explosive cards, then they're just dead on board to a Baneslayer Angel. So because it does such a great role of stopping these red decks, I expect that most players that have white mana available are going to be playing a couple of Baneslayer Angels, at the very least in their sideboard. The top card in my tier list for all Mythic rares is Terror of the Peaks. It's a 5/4 flying for 5 mana, a typical dragon. This one does not have haste though. And it has 2 abilities. Spell your opponent casts that target Terror of the Peaks, cost an additional 3 life, similar to what Thunderbreak Regent was doing. And the second ability, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equals to that creature's power to any target. So you cast it, it's 5/4 flying. Next turn you cast something big, like a Croxa. You deal a ton of damage to your opponent. You swing for 5 in the air. So that's a huge amount of pressure. It's a must-kill threat. If you get to untap with Terror of the Peaks, you're going to deal easily 10 points of damage, if not kill, which is likely going to be enough to kill your opponent in the type of strategies where I'd expect it to see play. Now you need to play this in a deck that plays a fair bit of creatures, relatively large creatures, so probably a green-red monsters type of deck, or something combo-ish. Now the fact that it doesn't have haste as a dragon is mitigated by the protection effect. So even though it doesn't have haste, so it's not that 5 points of guaranteed damage, if your opponent wants to remove it with a point removal, they'll lose 3 life, which is similar to the 5 points of damage that you'd have if it had haste. But because of the super high damage potential that it has, I think it will be well worth playing. In particular, you can one-shot your opponent if you get to revive 2 of those with something else. 3 of those is definitely a ton of damage. Actually, it'd be 30 points of damage. So if you want to bring back a Command the Dreadhorde combo deck, I'd highly encourage you to do so. It's going to be really fun seeing Terrors of the Peak rain terror on your opponents. Now, that is granted, I'm only giving it a rating of A and not S, because it still loses to Teferi. Teferi is going to bypass the protection effect, and since that doesn't have haste, you'll basically have wasted a turn. And I don't think it can compete with Temur Reclamation or some of the other fast decks that we have right now. And because of this, it's a very powerful card, but at very least until rotation, it's hard to see it just jump in and break the metagame. And there you have it, the completed tier list. Yoshi-Wan Kenobi's Core Set 2021 tier list. I hope that you've enjoyed this ranking of the cards. If you agree or disagree, please write a comment. If there are challenges that you'd like to see me execute on, feel free to post those in the chat as well. Or if there's other types of tier lists or rankings, or you just want to have my opinion on some cards, feel free to write those in the chat. I'll happily give out some opinions. I hope you've enjoyed this, and see you next time.